What's going on YouTube? Today we're going to talk about data exfiltration over DNS. So this is our subject today and it's the last part of this series. So first we talked about data exfiltration over TCP sockets, and then we talked about SSH, and then we moved into how to exfiltrate data with HTTP protocol. We also talked about data exfiltration through ICMP, and today will be the last tutorial of data exfiltration where we will be using the DNS protocol. Okay, so using DNS for data exfiltration is very popular for some reason, or for a reason. The reason is the DNS protocol is allowed in almost all firewalls in any organization network. For these reasons, attackers and threat actors, they prefer using the DNS protocol to hide the communication. So the idea behind data exfiltration over DNS is that the data that we moved, say we have here a victim machine and we have an attacker machine. Okay, so the data that we will move from the victim to the attacker will be exfiltrated through DNS, meaning the data will be exfiltrated through the domains. So what you need to do here, there are a couple requirements that we need to do in order to perform data exfiltration. So the data coming from victim to attacker will be coming over the domain names. So say we have a domain name called a.com, okay, and the domain is controlled by the attacker. So what's going to happen, the data will be moved from victim to the attacker through the domain name a.com. Literally, it will be moved through the subdomains, say v1.a.com, dataset2.a1.com, and as you can see, the subdomains here, D1 and D2, are the data that will be exfiltrated. And once the victim machine sends the request to the attacker machine using these domain names, the attacker will be able to resolve these domain names and extract the subdomain part and convert it to the data. It's kind of unique method of transforming or transporting data from the victim to the attacker. That's why we're going to need to explain a couple requirements before we dive into data exfiltration with DNS. So since we will be using subdomains for data exfiltration, it's worth mentioning, guys, that there are a couple limitations when it comes to transferring data over DNS. The first one is that the maximum length of the fully qualified domain name is 255 characters. That's the maximum length. For example, say I have a domain name www.attacker.com. This is the fully qualified domain name, and it must not exceed the 255 characters threshold. We need to put this into consideration when we want to exfiltrate data over DNS. The next thing is that the subdomain name, or we call it sometimes the label, the subdomain length must not exceed the 63 characters. Alright, so it means that when we are moving data from the victim to the attacker using subdomains, we need to make sure that the strings representation of the data do not exceed 63 characters. If it exceeds, we're going to need to send the data through many DNS requests. For example, say we have a password or a credit card CVV number. So CVV is composed of 3 numbers, say 3, 5, 6. That's the CVV of a credit card you want to exfiltrate over DNS. So you're going to convert this into base 64, and you're going to add the base 64 to the subdomain. Add a subdomain to what? To the domain name that is under your control, which is a.com, for example. Now what's going to happen, the victim will send DNS requests, alright, to the local DNS server to resolve this domain. And the local DNS server will ask the internet about p64a.com. Since a.com belongs to the attacker, and the attacker has DNS records that resolve all DNS requests for a.com, it's gonna resolve the p64, and the attacker will be able to extract the p64 into their own machine, decode it back, decode base 64, and then you'll be able to see the 356 CVV number. That's what happens. So this is what happens when we talk about data exfiltration over DNS. That's why we need to make sure that all the characters that are added as subdomain need the length of which needs to be not more than 63 characters. If they are more than 63 characters, no problem. In this case, you're going to need to send 2 DNS requests. Instead of b64a.com, you're going to say b64a.com and then b64 say v2a.com. That's how it works. Alright, now let's talk about the requirements to perform data exfiltration. Now you have an idea about data exfiltration over DNS. Now let's talk about the requirements. So let's open a new page and talk about the requirements of data exfiltration of DNS. Requirements of DNS exfil. So the first requirement, guys, is that we need a domain name. So domain name that is under control of the attacker. So the attacker would buy a domain name, okay, and then they will be able to edit all of the DNS records belong to that domain name. Now say we acquired a.com as a domain name. This is your domain name now, over which you are going to perform that exfiltration. What you're going to do, you're going to add DNS to edit the DNS records of that domain name. The first thing we need to do, guys, is to point the name servers of a.com to what? To your attacker machine IP address of the attacker machine. That's the first thing. What's going to happen here is that when the victim sends a request, say to b64.a.com, here the request will be received by the domain name a.com, the DNS server of the DNS server of your domain name, and because you have added the DNS, you have configured the name servers of your domain name and have configured the A records, you'll be able to resolve b64a.com. So b64 will be extracted and you'll be able to decode it to plain text. Okay, and the last thing, or the fourth thing, guys, is that we need to have fully configured DNS server. This is simple. Once you buy the domain name a.com and once you configure all of the DNS records such as NS, A records, you will have the DNS server fully configured, and your DNS server will receive the request that comes from the victim machine. Okay, so let's take a live scenario here and perform that exfiltration over DNS. So let's switch now to the attacker machine. The first thing, we need to connect to the attacker machine. The attacker machine is the machine from which we will host the DNS server and to which the request will come with all of the exfiltrated data. So we need to set up now the attacker machine. So sudo sh, I think I have it here. Okay, here is thm at attacker. You can connect to the attacker machine, guys, using sudo ssh thm, or first you have to connect to the jump box in this room. So sudo thm at, and you put in the IP address of the machine, sh TryHackMe, and now we're connected to the jump box. Now from jump box, guys, you can issue sudo ssh attacker or thm at attacker.thm. Once you do that, you will be able to connect to the attacker machine. Alright, let's get back now and keep this tab connected to the jump box. All of this is configured for you guys, no need to do anything on your behalf. Unless you want to change DNS configurations, follow up the guidelines mentioned in the room. All right, so now once we have the attacker machine ready here and we have got access to the victim machine, let's now first open a listener on the attacker machine that will listen for all of the DNS requests that will come from the victim machine. To do that, we can issue TCP dump, sudo TCP dump, and here we're going to use the Ethernet 0 interface, UDP port 53-V TCP dump, or without this. Okay, so here we are listening for all of the incoming packets on the interface Ethernet 0 and on port 53. 53 is the port for designated for DNS. So here we'll listen for all of the incoming DNS requests coming to the attacker machine on port 53. Okay, so right now we are listening on port 53. Now let's switch to the victim machine here. Okay, we are in the victim machine. Here is the machine from which we will exfiltrate the data. Data is in task 9, and as you can see, the exfiltrated data, or the data that will be exfiltrated, is composed of credit card information. So THM user, address, credit card, expire, and code. This is so realistic, and it happens all the time, where you may have heard of many headlines where you see credit card information have been leaked. That's how they are leaked. They are leaked mostly over the DNS. So we have the content that we need to exfiltrate. Let's convert that to base 64. Let's cd back, do that here, task 9 credit card, and then we convert this into base 64. Okay, now this is the base 64 content. This contents will be added as a subdomain. Okay, now I'm going to tell you about the subdomain in a while that will be used in this task. But since this cannot be used as a subdomain in a one DNS request, it exceeds the 63 characters limit on subdomains. So what we need to do here, guys, we need to split this maybe into a couple characters, 8 characters, 9 characters, 18 characters, whatever. We need to split the base 64 here into 18 characters. Maybe it's just a choice. You can select whatever you want, as long as it is less than 18, less than 63 characters. We split this, guys, into a couple, or let's say a group of base 64 strings, and each group will be added to the subdomain, and that's how we will send for each group, or for each sub base 64 string, we will send a separate DNS request. For example, we will use this one, for example, up until here, T until Q, for example, by the way, this is for instance, and add it to the subdomain. That's one DNS request. The next one, this is the other group, sorry, this is the second part. Here is the third part that will be added to the subdomain. So for every part, for every splitted part, we will send a separate DNS request, of course, after appending the base 64 string into the subdomain. So let's do that. Coming back to the first command, and then here we will clean. We need to do some cleaning on the string. So we remove new lines and using tr-d, and we put here the, what's wrong, man? So here, and so we clean the string by removing the new lines, and then we're gonna need to perform the split. So let's say we're gonna split or gather every every base 64 string that could be composed of 18 characters. So we use fold dash W18. So this way we split the full base 64 here into group of base 64 strings where each one consists of 18 characters. Okay, now the next thing we're gonna need to use sed command in order to append all of that into the subdomain. So our domain in this case is tunnel.com. So the subdomain is att. Okay, so we're going to append this to the subdomain that we have using sed -r So basically then we append that to the subdomain. Let's search for the ampersand. Okay, .att.tunnel.com. Alright, and then we perform the last step where we put the appended string. So 18 characters, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8. Okay, so here until X. att.tunnel.com. Okay guys, so what I did here, I just changed the method of splitting the characters. Instead of splitting them one by one, I did all of that in one command here. So converted the contents into base64 and then got rid of all of the new lines, composed or split the base64 string into groups of 18 base64 representation each, and then I use the set command to append dot and use the att.tunnel.com as a subdomain, and this is the output. As you can see, the output shows that we have more than one subdomain for the att.tunnel.com. These will be sent as DNS requests, right? So this is the data that we are transferring in base64. For each section, it will be sent as a separate DNS request and will be decoded in the on the attacker end. So how to execute? We use the same command here, okay, but with bash to execute all the underlying command. If we check out the attacker end, as you can see, we have the listener running on port 553. As you can see, we receive the data here. So what we need to do here, guys, we receive the data. Now we need to decode it back to its text representation. So we use echo with the data here, and we use cut to do some separation for the lines and the fields, and then we clean the output from the dots, and then lastly we convert to base64. As you can see, we receive the contents of the credit card. Okay, now that is for DNS exfiltration with data exfiltration with DNS. Now there was another thing, guys, which is the C2 communication. So basically what happens, sometimes we need to execute commands or scripts on the victim machine. So basically I have the script.sh. The script.sh, what it does, it pings the attacker machine. Okay, so if I want to execute this on the victim machine using the DNS protocol, what I have to do is the same what I did earlier. We have to convert the content into base64. Okay, after I convert the contents, I need to create text record of the domain name I control. The domain name I control is tunnel.com. The text record will contain the value of the script in base64, and that's how you do it. So we go to browser and you add text, and here you add script. Okay, and the value will be the base64 representation of the contents of the script. Once you do that, just make sure to use dig. Okay, no, here use dig, okay, and query the text record of the subdomain. If you receive the contents of the script in base64, then this was successful. After all of this is done, we can now execute the script on the victim machine using bash. So we query first the contents of the text record, which is base64. We clean the double quotes from the output, and then we use base64 to decode the content and execute it. That's how, as you can see, this is the ping to the test.hm.com, which is the actual content of the script. Okay, and the last thing that was requested in the room, guys, is to perform all of this but on the flag subdomain to receive the last flag of this machine, of this room. So that was it, guys. I hope you liked the video, and the last thing that we need to do in this room is the DNS tunneling task. Okay, this one is a bit tough. I'm gonna dedicate a separate video for that, but for now this is the last task. I hope you guys like the video, and I dedicated, as you can see here, a separate file for data exfiltration where I gathered all of the notes, all of the commands that you may need if you are doing or if you are involved in that exfiltration from day-to-day activities. So you can get the online access to the notes by subscribing to the channel membership. That was for today. I will see you in the next video.